Greetings, everyone. Welcome. I hope you see very clearly, and honestly, that's my favorite few minutes of video because he, in a very short amount of time, captures for us how they use big data across the line and vein to make better decisions. And he is so articulate about his big data. Yet, I find very few organizations as strategic as he is about his utilization of information to make his decisions, and it almost makes it feel like his decision making is really easy to do because he knows exactly inside and out his patterns of business, his consumers, etc. So some of the examples we've already talked about. So remember John Madigan, he's brilliant and utilizing big data to make those decisions and as we move forward. So the idea is there's lots of values, and I think you can guess what those are. And certainly you can read about them in the book as well, but it's going to improve our effectiveness as marketers. It's also going to help us understand those consumers, stakeholders. Again, remember, it's not just about the external consumer. We should do this with employees too. What kind of analyzing of data are we using with them? Do we look at their reviews every year and gather that data across our employee groups to make training decisions? Where are we collectively not very good at as an employee base? There's so much data in organizations as a process of doing business, but we're not using it. So again, it's going to help us understand those consumers. It's going to help us better satisfy them if we create action plans to grow in that area. It provides what we call in marketing this knowledge base. I need a knowledge base of information to make decisions, and it's going to do it for us. It's going to help us generate evidence to support our decisions. I cannot imagine selling an idea to investors, to a board, to my supervisor without having data to support what it is. It's going to help us sell anything we're doing. And again, it's going to further establish these metrics or baselines to evaluate our performance. Again, we can make a lot of decisions, but it doesn't mean they're good decisions, and it doesn't mean we've learned from those decisions, and having metrics or baselines are going to help us do that. So data then is separated into kind of three general categories because, again, this is a little overwhelming in terms of the information is everywhere, more so today than ever before in our lives. So how can we systematically break it down so we know how to generate certain veins of market research that we're going to need? The three categories are secondary research, and we simply say secondary research is data that other people gather that we're going to find and utilize. There's internal data. So as a process of running an organization in our industry, we gather data every day just as a process. For example, someone registers for a running race or an entertainment concert or buys tickets from us. That is just a process of doing business, so we know who to give the tickets to, but there's a whole bunch of data sitting there as a result. We gather information about number of people we serve every day, whether it's occupancy or numbers or etc. That's all just part of doing business that we generate on a regular basis, but we may or may not be using that data to make decisions. So internal market research, what we say is secondary because it's generated maybe not by me, but employees, volunteers, whoever in our organization, but it is generated by somebody in our organization as a process of doing business, not for a particular reason other than operational kinds of decisions. Standardized secondary research is research gathered by other people again, but outside of our organization. So the millions of people out there gathering information and data, whether to share a story or information or do an actual report for someone else on a research area of topic or need or specialty theme. A bunch of other people are gathering data, publishing it, and presenting it, and it may be data that we want to have. So it's another source of information for us that we may need, and we're going to go through each of these. So secondary data, other people collect it, internal or external to our organization that we may want to go find. Secondly is primary research, and primary research is specialized and it's done by us. So we have a particular issue or topic, we need to go gather the information and put it into a format that is understandable for others, and we're going to make some conclusions about that information. So in our marketing plan process, we're going to utilize both pieces of information, secondary and primary data, and we're going to start the process yet this week by going out and gathering some data and putting it into a format so it can be useful and helpful to the organization. So we're going to conduct this week some of our own primary data gathering. Next week, as we move into strategy, we're going to do some more secondary data gathering as well. So as we move forward, remember, as simple as this, data really comes from three places. Either I gather it, right, and do so in a reliable and valid way. So again, because I want to gather it correctly in an unbiased fashion, if I'm going to utilize it, I don't want to bias this information on any level, because garbage in is garbage out. If I gather bad stuff, then I'm going to make a bad decision from it. So I'm also going to look at these secondary sources to make sure they were valid and reliable and how they gathered it if I'm going to use it, which again gets a little more scary because I didn't gather it. I know my own fault when I gather the data, but I don't necessarily know somebody else's. So that's the goal when we utilize data, is we want good data, good information that we can make better decisions with. So let's start and just talk briefly again about secondary data, internal market research. So even John's example on the video and a couple I've already given, we have a bunch of financial information that's internal market research, data laying around our organization that we may or may not be using. So we want to understand as much of this data and information as we can get a hold of. We want to know patterns of business by numbers or volume, revenue. We want to know revenue and profit by market segments. You know, how many children do we serve in this organization versus seniors versus teens versus adults? That information by day of week, by month of year, and by years is incredibly helpful. What's our pattern across the years? There are several examples in this chapter that look at those kinds of patterns and how we can better understand information from that. We also want to understand things internally, like a market share analysis that might be conducted. So oftentimes in the lodging side of our world, that's conducted on a regular basis with Smith Travel Research. It's what they did for us was provide us an analysis of how we're doing in this competitive set. So based on my yield score, as you know, if I have 101%, then I'm gaining more of my fair share. And that's critical market research data. That's part of business anymore. It's not a special process. Someone does that for us and we get it on a regular basis. If I'm at 80% yield, that's not very good because I'm not getting my fair share of this market in terms of occupancy and revenue, or RevPAR as the comparison is. So that information already being conducted, already being generated, whether I use it or not is up to me, but we need to understand this across our industry. So here's several pieces or examples across our industry in the four areas, whether it's tourism and attractions and recreation, food and beverage, event, lodging. Gives us a sense of where that data is. My first step in an organization is to take a look at what they have laying around. Internal market research. They don't call it that, but I do, because I'm going to use it to make decisions, and critically important. Why would I focus on a day that sells itself and is already strong? I need to look at the day of the week. That's not the example I gave you with Shepler's early on. Fulfills that too. Why would I fill their ferry boat on a Saturday at noon? Didn't make a lot of sense because they were selling their ferry boat at that time. But 10 a.m. was not as busy. Existing data hopefully also exist as a regular part of business in marketing. We have analytics anymore with all of our social sites and our website that tells us automatically, as long as we've subscribed to the free service, which is free to get analytics data, to make sure we're linked to that. So anytime I want or need, I can see when people are clicking on our sites, how many pages they're looking at, when they're accessing information on our social sites, etc. So this analytics world in marketing is data that's being generated just by having a social site and a website. So the question is, am I using it or not? I work with a lot of organizations that might have analytics, but they're not even looking at it at a regular basis to understand how to better improve. existing data or information regarding responses or participation to past marketing efforts. We have been, as an industry, not very effective at evaluating our decisions that we've made in marketing. But there are some easier ways to do that, and sometimes it's really difficult. That's why, and let's use John's example of 70 billboards. How are you going to evaluate if 70 billboards were effective use in decision? Well, you're going to hopefully ask them as part of their reservation process, how did you hear about us? And when you learn how they heard about us and they said, we saw your 70 billboards along I-75, then you know that that's an effective tool in their decision making. But there's some obvious things like collecting coupons. And in an example I gave in an earlier chapter related to the recreation center, that had been collecting the coupons as just part of the process of doing business, because when you came in and you wanted the discount, they attached it, as part of process, and collected it from you, but put it in a big bag in the back room. So nobody did anything with those coupons. So it was just part of doing business, but we didn't utilize that data. So again, collecting that data to say, what, we've only gotten 10 back from this coupon book the whole year. Was that an effective thing to do? So it informs and again gives us information to make decisions by. So whether it's existing customer profiles, do we gather, again, the country club example I just gave? How about customer satisfaction data? We've been having comment cards around our organization forever, or we're part of our process at checkout is they actually answer 4 questions. But are we using that kind of data? And are we comparing it by different markets? How did the wedding group like us versus the convention group versus the transient family traveler versus the transient business traveler? And sometimes in lodging it may be easier to gather some of that because of the way our business is set up. But I would argue and debate that every aspect of our organization can do that. It might mean making some systems, changes, etc. But why do you think Gordon Foods asks you every time you come in, what's your zip code? Well, they do that just to gather information about their consumer from a geographic standpoint, so they can establish points that they may need to reach people differently, and they know what's working for them. Well, how are they, currently reaching people? Consumer behavior insight, again, what are they doing when they're not with us? Where do they buy? Where do they shop? What do they listen to? There might be data that we have right available internally, but we may have to go externally for some of that as well. So all of these areas, and then just briefly from a financial perspective and a marketing perspective, this is all data that's laying around that we need to have to make better decisions. But there's more than that, as talked about in the chapter. But keep this powerful information is laying at our fingertips. We just haven't looked at it in general the way we should and could. Other secondary standardized sources exist, not just internal to the organization, but outside. So again, keep in mind, if we're not even using the stuff that's available to us in front of us, chances are we're not going out to find other information to help us make these decisions. It's, again, collectively probably the weakest link we have in the marketing plan process. If an organization is doing a marketing plan, this area of it is not typically at all addressed. So secondary standardized, again, is data that others generate that we access through proprietary, public, and or purchased venues that help us in decision making. So again, keep in mind it's not just Googling. In fact, Google is the enemy on some level because it's too easy just to do that and look at the first 10 or 12 things that are up there, and that's how we make our decisions. Don't do that. Be very strategic about how you're going to sort through the millions and billions of hits and information. The internet's helpful, incredibly helpful for us, but we want to be very targeted at where we're going to look for that standardized kind of information. So again, and it might be data that others have generated and hold private, but I might be able to get it, might be able to buy it, or I might be able to ask them for it, to use it, to look at it. But it might be very public, like on Google, and we just have to find the little needle in a haystack, I call it. So information is overwhelming anymore today, and we want to, again, be strategic about where we go for it, but we always want to stay updated that new tools or sources to look for it. I meet with a reference librarian once a year to sit through what are all the new tools available to us as a university-connected person, because our universities buy databases that only we can access. That's why we have a sign-in code to get into the library system, because our universities spend millions of dollars a year on data and information for us. So that's a privilege and a benefit of being connected to a system that is not as easy when you're external to a university, because of the cost of some of these databases to have. So we just need to find it, be strategic, not spend a million years on this. We have a lot of work to do in this marketing plan, but we want to be quick to, again, access really valuable, insightful, helpful pieces of information that other people are gathering. So some of the things we might look at that are common to our process are research databases that are listed here, are some of the more common that I go to right away to look for data about our field specifically. In particular, that will be helpful. But then there are global databases like the U.S. Census, IBIS World, Mintel Reports, GMID are all databases of insight and information about markets, about industries, about patterns of participation, etc. So all sources and sites that I will look at. I always go to the professional association tied to, or associations tied to the area that I'm writing a marketing plan for. So if it's in the event industry, I'm going to look at MPI and PCMA, and I'm going to look at the catering associations and the special event associations and all of the associations, because they're all gathering data for their members. And so sometimes as a non-member, I can still get their data, and sometimes I have to join to get that data, because that's usually a benefit of association. So always go to the associations. I put question marks next to Google here because I think that's the cheap and easy way out, and the more likely you will get unreliable information and not necessarily valid. You and I can publish today, this minute, and get it on the internet. And it doesn't necessarily at all mean my opinion is of any value to your decision making. So you have to be really careful when you just Google it to find information that you want to use in this process. Google Scholar, some suggest, again, certainly more helpful because it's looking at scholarly work or research-based work. It's not just someone's opinion here. We're looking for data to drive decision makings. I'm not looking for Patty Janes's opinion on a subject unless she has a great depth of knowledge or information about a topic that is well researched and accepted. So be careful of everything that you just get online or read about in the paper, and I'll give you an example. So Google Scholar looks at scholarly work. The challenge is it can be outdated, and it certainly isn't inclusive. So although I like it better than just a Google search because it's getting to some data for us, be careful at the age of that information. In today's world, we're looking at things that are relevant today. There may be an occasion or a reason to look back over time or at historical pieces, but I'm looking at a window of 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 5 years kind of at most, because information does change so rapidly and it's available in a shorter term. So look at relevance today. So we use research every day, but this is a quick example of how data is embedded in popular press. We like statistics, we like hearing figures and frequency, etc. But we want to make sure it's good and relevant, whether we're buying it or it's publicly disseminated. So again, all I have to do is pull a publication and I can read about a study of what they think about caffeine today, but we could pull this same thing about caffeine being bad 10 years ago. So a study here, USA Today, every popular press, you can't walk straight while texting, a study confirms. Information and data that is abundant today. And we read something and we go, oh, I'm supposed to have caffeine today. And we buy in right away without really understanding who gathered it, how they gathered it. Do I really want to believe this information? We just think if it's printed, we believe it. So be very careful. Popular press publications may not be where we want to go unless we believe the source of that popular press information is valid and reliable. So we want to look for data, again, that helps support where it's come from. Here's part statistics from census related to coffee consumption. And we had students do a marketing plan on a coffee house, and this is incredibly valuable and important when we have reliable data about coffee consumption that can help us drive decisions. So looking for valid sources. So census, again, very valid. All of these databases that are accepted in the marketing world, IBS world, again, gives us information. Here's about party and event planners in the US. Here's a market research report just on that, all from IBIS world. So we have to purchase some of this if you want it, and it could be fairly expensive because, again, gathering data is, and if it's of value to people, then there's a whole market for that, obviously. But you probably haven't even heard of some of these market research databases. Well, here is the time in our marketing plan that you need to access them. Here's an example of IAPA and the research that they conduct on a regular basis. You'll note here it's $1,000 for this if you're a non-member, but if you're a member, it's free. So global themes in the industry now available. What critical insight would be there if I'm running a theme and amusement park that I could access and not guess, because this has been generated in a reliable, valid source. So always go to your professional association. It's incredibly valuable. And then just had another one about market research and some other statistics, etc. So when looking at this, again, remember, looking for valid, reliable data that'll help us make decisions. It's worth it when we find really great standardized stuff. We have over 250 journals in our field anymore, which has in 10 years erupted. Used to be a handful of journals that is academic research that's been reviewed by others in the field as more valid and reliable than just anybody publishing on the internet. And so we can see study after study after study in those 250 journals in our field, and I'll provide some links to you to get to those databases, but our library system does a really great job in subscribing. But this kind of information is critical. There are people gathering great data on a regular basis, but if you and I don't access it, then it's of no use or value to us. So getting better and more efficient in gathering data quickly is going to be critical in our field if we're going to buy into this whole big data piece, and I wouldn't make a marketing decision without it. So these secondary sources have an advantage and a disadvantage clearly, and you could probably guess based on my comments already what those are. But their advantages are, one is they're inexpensive unless I have to pay $1,000 for a report. But generally, I can access information relatively inexpensively. I don't have to conduct the whole study, which is more expensive than accessing somebody else's. It's easily acceptable if I know how to find it and navigate in this unbelievable world of information. I need to get to these pieces to, again, quickly gather and use that to make decisions. And it's available today because the study's already been done. So how awesome is this that you can sit at your computer right now, right? Or go to the library. I know, a novel and new idea, but physically go to the library because there's still some resources and publications that aren't all online. But you can do all that right now and gather a whole bunch of really valuable stuff. It has never been more exciting in marketing to utilize data because it's easier than it's ever been before, but you need to be more careful than you ever have before because there's so much. The disadvantages is the nature of it being outdated and unreliable, that I don't know who that person was who gathered it, so I'm always going to be a skeptic, which is funny because I'm not a skeptical person, but I am in regards to data and people gathering it. I want to make sure if I'm using it that it's really good stuff. And it might not be applicable. You know, they may have looked at coffee drinkers in Europe versus coffee drinkers in the US, and I have a coffee shop here in the US, and so even though it's about coffee and consumption, the population of people they talk to aren't at all the market that I would be looking to serve. So even though it's in the vicinity, it's not directly applicable for me. So we have to be really careful just in this part of the process.